Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Valentin Escanuela, and I am an executive leadership coach with the San Diego County Office of Education. And I'm joined by my colleagues, Dr. Stephen Dorsey. Today, we'll be taking you through the distance learning instructional continuity document for the LatinX student group. We're going to review the document sections and also speak to current considerations as we must take our response to distance learning and begin to adapt it as new information becomes available. We call it distance learning, we call it online learning, we call it hybrid learning. The different models of instructional delivery continue to evolve as this pandemic continues to change how we do things at our schools. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started with the purpose of this document. The purpose of this document is really a response to the COVID-19 school closures and the transition to blended learning. SDCOE developed learning continuity guidance that provided distance learning guidance for LatinX students' instructional access. It was in alignment to the SDCOE instructional continuity learning plan template and the equity resource summary. This document does include sections in communication, social emotional supports, instruction, as well as other additional resources as well. So this first section of the document is a communication section. This section includes questions for an LEA to consider as they continue to create high quality blended learning contexts for students. Since our school closures came unannounced and forced schools to close for one day, from one day to the next, this made the transition to online learning challenging for many schools. Communication has been key to the success during this time of schools. And so connecting with families to communicate plans for students, for student learning has been difficult, but at the same time also rewarding as schools begin to see the support that they can provide students when they make those successful communications. This section includes questions that have provided LEAs with a guide to reflect on current practices and have also challenged LEAs to think through about their existing structures and entry points for communication with LatinX families. Additionally, these guiding questions have been designed to prompt LEAs to think about data collection and next steps as we continue to move forward during this time of COVID-19. So Steve, current considerations.
Definitely. So Valentin, why is that intentional communication focus so important?
Well, I think for our LatinX, especially for our LatinX community, Steve, it's important for us to consider that there's going to be certain types of entry points that we're going to have to create for our Latinx families. And so ensuring that we have translation services available for them. How do we communicate these translation services are available to our families is important. Many times families will struggle to communicate or provide feedback to the school because they feel like they don't have that support in place. And so it's making sure that we have those translation services available is critical. Making sure that we have our written communication that's sent home translated into Spanish so that parents and students have access to that same kind of information that's going home from our schools, from our districts is critical as well.
Yeah, that's extremely helpful. What do you think we can learn from our communities, families, and students?
Well, one of the things that we know about our Latinx communities and students is that they love community groupings. They want to stay in touch. They want to be connected. We understand from the research that Latinx students love to have positive relationships and good relationships, meaningful relationships with staff. And so ensuring that we have structures of communication in place where teachers and schools are connecting with families to learn more about them, to see how this current situation is impacting them is critical as we continue to look at how we can best support them.
So do you think this information will be helpful as we are looking to support our multi-tiered system of supports?
Absolutely. So one of the things that we know about COVID-19 is that it's really impacted our Latinx community and our African American student community pretty harshly. And so many of our Latinx families and community members are essential workers. And so they've been exposed, they continue to be exposed to the virus. And so if there's anything that schools can do to utilize the collection of data the contacts we're making with families, if we're learning more about them, is how can we as a school, as a system, as an LEA, begin to provide those support systems for families as we learn more about their conditions, their challenges, past, present, and future as well.
Yeah, oh, so important to everything they need for their support.
The next section of the document is the social emotional learning section. And this social emotional learning piece has been on the minds of districts and schools for some time now. However, the pandemic has really made SEL even more important as students struggle to cope during these uncertain times. And so this section was designed to have LEAs assess their current SEL delivery practices and also consider how they might adapt those services in a blended learning model. And so section also includes resources that could support educators with understanding mental health impact on the LatinX community, as well as information on trauma-informed practices. But as we get into our current reality and our current conditions, and thinking about the current reality of our system, of our schools and our classrooms, there's some questions that we got to consider. What do we understand or know about our students? How are current systems of support responsive to the needs of students and staff? And how can we leverage SEL to support academics? And Steve, this is a big focus for many of our schools right now. And it's important for our schools to understand who their students are. And so what are the structures that we have in place where we are providing opportunities for students to learn, for teachers and staff to learn about who our students are and what they're experiencing.
And really taking that equity component lens within that social emotional learning component of looking at the 5 different CASEL categories within the social emotional learning continuum, making sure we have that self-awareness and social awareness for our students in a culturally responsive component is going to be so important for our students to really feel safe and reflective and responsible in everything that's going on around them, from COVID to the election to the social unrest that's happening right now.
And thinking about being responsive, you know, we always use the word responsive to the needs of our students. And in order for us to be responsive, we really have to understand who our students are, right? And for us to understand what our students' experiences, cultures, backgrounds, and what they bring to the table can also help us leverage social emotional learning as a way to support academics.
Key. And it's so important because it really goes into the fabric of everything you're talking about. The importance of that communication that you started with at the beginning of this presentation flows right into this. And really that SEL component really flows underneath everything. And focusing that within the equity as well really makes this so vital to the success of whatever support systems we are developing, hybrid, blended, streaming teaching, as we go forward.
Absolutely. And the integration of social emotional learning into the daily instructional practice of teachers also a big critical component to ensure that we are meeting the needs, the social emotional needs of our students. And so one of the things that we also got to consider as well. So as we move forward with the expanding equity lens section of this document had links to different resources that provide educators with information and strategies to implement culture responsive teaching and learning. For example, current research is highlighted, and there are also links to videos and webinars that can support educators to create more equitable and culturally responsive learning environments for students. And so we have the research, we have the links, Steve, right? But as we think about the current reality and our current conditions is to really consider these questions. How might we support teachers, staff with the delivery of culturally responsive teaching and learning? And what do we need to consider in order to ensure our system is culturally proficient and meets the needs of our students? And so a big component of this, Steve, is really that professional learning for teachers.
Exactly. And it again goes back to that identity piece of making sure that we understand who our kids are so we can actually be culturally responsive to them. So we can actually validate the culture that they are bringing into the class, taking an assets-based approach to everything that our students are bringing, the richness of their culture that comes into the classroom and really supporting that along the way. But also making sure that we are supporting them in the new form of learning that they've entered into.
Absolutely. It's supporting teachers in how to be intentional in planning lessons and collaborating with one another in meeting the needs of our Latinx students. Um, Utilizing existing structures like PLCs to have teachers come together and collaborate on how to design and develop lessons that are culturally responsive to the needs of their students. And really tying it back to the importance of communication, right? And setting structures and entry points for us to be able to learn about the experiences of our and backgrounds and cultures of our students as well.
You got it. That underlying current that's going to run through to really help them be successful as an LEA is that communication piece.
Digital content delivery. This section really has links for teachers to access materials and curriculum designed with the Latinx experience in mind. And so as we continue to create learning opportunities for students, it's important to consider how students see themselves in the curriculum. So some of these links provide that bridge for teachers as they plan and continue to develop units of study. The materials can also be used or served as a resource for teachers as they put their plans together. So in thinking about our current conditions and reality is really how have we adapted content via blended learning, via online learning, via hybrid learning? How is that content reflective of students' experiences, backgrounds, and cultures?
Right. And it's really important to focus on that blended learning continuum. Clayton Christensen from the Christensen Institute created a blending learning model that really shows you how to blend the technology that we currently have from the brick and mortar all the way to a fully virtual component, and understanding that environment and the asynchronous versus synchronous approaches that we can bring to support our students. And again, tying that SEL component into that synchronous piece, if our kids are at home and using digital, that's going to be so important because they need to have that connection to your school site.
Absolutely. And thinking about our Latinx students and, the ability to connect to the curriculum is incredibly important. And so one of the things that we know about our students in that connectedness piece is it really comes from the delivery of the content that we are providing them and how they see themselves and how they can relate to what's being delivered in their learning experiences. So as we go to the digital devices, Wi-Fi access, and non-tech options sections of this document, these sections really were focused on supporting LEAs to think and plan on how they would assess the digital connectedness of their Latinx communities. The transition to blended learning definitely has been a challenging one, but being able to ensure that every student has access to the curriculum is essential in meeting the needs of the communities that we serve. LEAs really need to have an understanding of the digital demands and needs of their students. And so being able to consider what are those adaptations that we need to take in order for students in order to meet the needs of students that do not have digital connection is imperative, right? Because every single student deserves to have equitable access to learning regardless of technology connectedness. And so this definitely has been a challenge. And so as we continue to move forward in our current conditions and our current reality is really thinking about how are we ensuring that students have equitable access to the curriculum with technology and without technology. We have places in the state that are very rural and may not have that kind of internet connection that other students do. So how are we handling those situations?
Right.
How might we ensure that curriculum is transferable in a blended learning environment? How are we ensuring that a curriculum is transferable in a hybrid learning environment? And so thinking about the strategies that we're using for delivery of content of instruction is that every single student should have equitable access to learning.
Right. And this is that point of equity that's so important for us to monitor. As we had a huge digital divide before, we want to make sure that we are being equitable in that approach to getting those devices out. And do we have our kids fully connected and given what they need to be successful in this environment? So that's something that we should really, as LEAs, focus on making sure that we have bridged that digital divide for our students to make sure that they can be successful.
Absolutely. And so that brings us to the last part of our presentation today, the resources for this Latinx student group. And so we've attached here some links to our multilingual education and global achievement department, as well as our SDCOE equity department, where you can find many, many resources that can help support your Latinx students within your LEAs and your schools and your classrooms. So thank you once again for joining us today. We hope this information was valuable, and please feel free to reach out and contact us if you have any questions.